Alright, you have to figure out your machine. You got to know your machine and know what's a straight stitch and what's a zigzag. Most of what we will be doing uses straight stitches. Okay, that's just a straight line of stitches. A zigzag, when it sews in a zigzag. Now here's how a sewing machine actually works. Okay, you have two threads. You have a top thread, which is coming from your spool right here, and you have a bottom thread that usually comes from some kind of bobbin. Okay. Now my bobbin sits flat. Some of yours will sit, vertically. I've seen them where they come in from the side. I've seen them where it's actually got another spool that's feeding into the bottom of the machine. It's however your machine works, okay? What basically happens is as the machine sews, it forces the bottom thread to loop over the top thread at the same time it's forcing the top thread to loop over the bottom thread, which makes a nice tight little sandwich. This is what holds the fabric together, okay? Now, you have things, okay, so first of all, you have to figure out which stitch selection, okay, is your straight stitch. Find your straight stitch, okay? And my machine has a width, which is also my needle positioner, okay? I like my needle to go right down the center, of my foot. This little piece here is called your foot, okay? This is what actually holds your fabric in place while you sew. And they come in different shapes and sizes depending on what you're doing, okay? Underneath the foot are the feed dogs, okay? That's what they're actually called. They're called the feed dogs. They have little teeth on them, okay? If your feed dogs aren't set in the up position, mine won't go in the bottom position because it's such a simple machine. Some machines you can actually disengage your feed dogs. The feed dogs, what they do is they reach up and they grab the fabric and they pull it through the foot, okay? And it just goes, okay? If your foot is set with too much tension on it, it's not going to be able to pull the fabric through, okay? And that's what this little doohickey up here, that's the tension for the foot. So you're going to have to read your manual so that you can find all this stuff on your machine. My machine is very, very simple, okay? Like I said, I like my needle to go right down the center of my foot, okay? And so therefore I will position it there. When I'm doing a zigzag, this actually controls how wide my zigzag is. How far the needle jumps side to side to create the zigzag. It's pretty cool. When we get to a zigzag, you'll know. Stitch length. My stitch length goes from 0 to 4. Some of yours will go to 6. And maybe some will go to 11. Who knows? That just, in mine, it's basically, if it's set at 4, it's doing, I believe, 4 stitches every, I want to say, ½ inch, okay? If it's set at 1, it's doing, 4 times, or, basically a whole lot more. I can't remember exactly. I like mine somewhere in the middle, between 2 and 3, okay? It's completely up to you how long you want your stitches, but you really don't want really long stitches. Generally, you want at least a ½ stitches per every ½ inch, okay? But you don't want so many that it's like, so, you want to find a nice, comfortable medium, okay? This also depends on your fabric, okay? Because we're going through so many layers for the rapier doublets, you're going to need probably more stitches, but you don't want them so close together because then it won't sew at all. Okay? And all the stitch length does is it tells the feed dogs how much to move the fabric forward as you go. Okay? Final thing, tension. This is the tension that's on your thread. Okay? The thicker your thread, the thinner your thread, you may need to adjust your tension. Most machines have what they call an auto feature. Mine's on auto right now. And 99% of the time, that's just fine. Okay? The only time I really have issues with it is when I'm using upholstery thread in my machine. All right, so you have your needle. Of course, some of you have automatic needle threaders. I hate those things, but you, if you want to use it, go right ahead. The final thing, this is my lever for dropping my foot, okay? It must be in the down position for me to sew, okay? On the side, you have your flywheel. Your flywheel controls your machine. I can actually hand crank my machine through a stitch, okay? This other wheel on the side of mine, that's just my stitch selector, okay? You know, on, off, that kind of thing. All right. You want to place your pedal in a comfortable position for you, however it works best for you. Now, I'm going to start with the sleeve because it's a nice straight seam. Okay. Don't stab yourself with pins, it hurts. On your feed dog plate, okay, the plate where your feed dog, you'll notice a series of lines, okay? If I take this ruler, I can actually measure from the needle and find out exactly which one of my lines is the ½ line, okay? And that's which line is exactly ½ inch away from my needle, all right? That's how you know, because we're using, if you use the ½ inch seam allowance like I asked you to, how to do it. So what I do is I place my fabric in the machine, okay? I don't want to place it right at the end of the seam, okay? Because then there's nothing for the feed dogs to grab, okay? What I will do is I'll give it about 1/8 of an inch, okay? So if you look at your foot, there's like a little hole in your foot that you can see through it, okay? Make sure it's all filled with fabric, okay? The edge of my fabric, okay, so first of all, this is the seam I'm sewing right here, okay? So I want that edge to line up with the line that's ½ inch away from my needle, okay? You understand what I'm doing? Does everybody understand any questions, okay? I lower my foot into its position. I want to make sure my threads are going out the back of my foot, okay? Some people like to hand crank the needle through the first stitch, okay? Me, I just grab a hold of the threads and go for it. And, oh, that's what's wrong. It was set for winding my bobbin, okay? So I've done a couple of stitches. Now, all machines also have a reverse function on them. Usually it's a lever or a button that you can push. At the very beginning and end of your seam, you want to lock the stitches into place. You do that by stitching a couple of stitches, reversing a couple of stitches, and then sewing through your seam. Okay? Now, I place my needles in a perpendicular fashion to my seam. I can sew right over them. Okay? If you didn't do that, or now all I'm doing is trying to keep my fabric, the edge of it, running right along that line. I'm not pulling my fabric in any way, shape, or form. So I'm not forcing it through the machine. I'm also not holding it back. I'm letting the machine do all the work. Okay? Now I'm going to adjust my stitch length here just so you guys can see the differences in stitch length. Let's go way down. Let's go back up to where I want. When I get to the end, I'll make sure your fingers don't go underneath here. That will do that. Again, do a short reverse at the end. My machine also has a lovely thread cutter. I can just cut it right there. If your machine doesn't have a thread cutter, just keep a pair of scissors handy and just nip your threads as you go along. You don't have to be precisely on the end, okay? I'll let you guys look at this seam later, but you can, if you look at it, it's a nice tight seam. It looks basically the same on the top as it does on the bottom. If you've got a bunch of threads bunching up, there's a problem with your tension on your machine somewhere. Your machine's not threaded up properly. you know, there's an adjustment that needs to be made somewhere. Okay? Now, like I said, I pin my fabric in such a way that I can sew right over my pins, but I always like to sew with my pins, you know, on the top side of my fabric. That's just me. I have sewn them on the underside of my fabric, and so it doesn't really matter. But again, I'm just using my fingers to help guide this through here, and not really worrying about it, okay? Now these are nice straight seams, so they're real easy to sew, okay? Now these tables are not the most stable thing in the world. Your machine, as you saw, my machine started to bounce on me because I was going so fast, and just slow it down, that kind of thing. Now, here's where it's going to get funky, is that side seam on your doublet. Because one edge is straight, and one edge has a whole bunch of curves in it, and we ease those two seams together. I want the straight seam on the bottom. So if you pinned it with your pins on the wrong side, well, I guess you're sewing with your pins on the wrong side. Yeah. Or you can switch your pins around to the opposing side. What I'm actually going to do, okay, is I'll line it up just like normal, okay? I want to make sure as my fabric goes underneath the feed dog, underneath the foot, that it's as flat as it possibly can, so that I don't sew wrinkles or, you know, gathers into my fabric, okay? So I'll sew this one a little bit slowly, and what I'm actually doing is stretching it a little bit, okay? I'm kind of pulling that top fabric flat so that, and you can see this fabric's bunching up all over here, but underneath the foot, it's flat, okay? And that's what I want. And I just go, you don't have to go fast, and I'm getting to this point where it's a kind of a severe curve. And what I'll do is, again, I'll just use my fingers to guide it into there so that that edge always runs along that line. Okay? Well, what's really cool is it's flat on that side, and it's got a little curve on that side. Kind of neat, huh? And so, this shoulder seam's the same way. I want to try to you can see there's fabric that's going to bunch up in there. All right. So again, what I'll do is, as I sew, I'll try to I'm not going to pull hard, but I want to pull it so that it's taut. Okay. So that as it goes underneath that foot, between the foot and the feed dog, it goes flat. Okay. My machine, the Scholastic here, it only sews, I want to say up to 1,000 stitches a minute. I can't remember exactly. I'd have to look at the manual. Most machines do close to 1,500. Okay. One of the reasons I like this machine, it's all metal gear, so it sews a little slower. Okay. Most modern machines will sew really, really fast, and I don't like trying to keep up with that. So yeah. But yeah, you can sew both side seams and then the shoulder seam. You can do like I'm doing, which is just kind of going around it, And it's okay, sometimes I'm locking it in with a couple stitches, sometimes I lock it in with 5 stitches. It's just whatever I happen to lock it in with. It doesn't really matter. God, this is bouncing. This table bounces so much more than my desk at home. My last thing. Again, you can see how I shake my fabric out, and I make sure as I insert it underneath the foot that it's flat. Oh, I missed. All right, so there I just missed my seam. I was on the wrong line, so I'm just going to line it up again. I'm not even going to worry about it, and I'm just going to sew it again. There we go. I caught it right that time. And it's because I started at the top of the side seam where the curve is, and it made it a little bit more difficult, but I got through it. The key is to try and not force your fabric through the machine, to try to keep your edges lined up at all times, And you try to keep that edge lined up along that line as you sew. I didn't even hit a needle. Wow, that was good. Okay. I think that's all the pieces I have to sew right now. Yep, because all my other pieces are ready. The other thing I did, okay, is I took my epaulet, I folded it in half and pressed it. Okay, that's how the epaulet piece works. That's how the epaulet pattern piece works. Because we want fashion fabric on the top and the bottom of the epaulet. That's why we cut it like we do. Okay, so I took it and pressed it, folded it in half and pressed it. So I won't need to worry about that until we're setting in the sleeves. So, all right. So everybody understand? This is how I sew. This is how I was taught to sew, and it works for me. All right. If you sew a different way, fine. Go for it. Yeah. As long as it works for you. The key really is to make sure your fabric is going through your machine nice and flat. Yeah, especially on these seams where I have a curve going into a straight. I want to try and make sure, you know, everything goes through smoothly. I don't want any wrinkles or bunches in my seam. So you may have to put a little tension on either end. Just don't force it through the machine. Okay. If this was my actual doublet, and this was my I would go through and I would snip off all these threads. At the end. Since it's a mock-up, I'm not going to worry about it. Okay. Now, after I get done, where's my pincushion at? Oh, there he is. Okay. After you get done sewing, you guys can just kind of spin around over here. I'm going to press my seam. Okay? Pressing my seam is how I ensure that I get a nice straight line. Okay? Everybody says, oh, I can't even sew a straight line. Guess what? Neither can I. Okay? I come close because I've had a lot of practice, but at the same time, I really can't sew a straight line. But by pressing my seam open, I can ensure that it's going to look straight. Okay? Because the pressing will take care of any inconsistencies I may have. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay my fabric out. Okay? You got to be careful not to burn your fingers when you do this. This is very possible you can. I'm going to find my seam and I'm going to open it up. Okay? And I'm going to try to flatten it out with my fingers a little bit. I'm going to take the point of my iron and just slowly work it down the seam. Okay? The only thing I really want to press is the seam part. I really don't want to press the rest of the pattern piece because I don't want to create any unnecessary folds like I just did. So you can see I press it down, and what that does, and I'm going to turn this right side out so you can see the difference, okay? So that's the seam I just pressed, okay? You see how nice and flat and almost invisible that looks, okay? This is the seam I haven't pressed yet. You can see a distinct difference there. This one's bunching up. There's gathers and it's folding and everything else like that. This is why you need to press your seams open, because that looks awful. That looks lovely. Pressing the seams open matters a lot. Now, I usually don't press the seams open on my mock-ups because they're mock-ups. I don't really worry about it too much, okay? I'm going to do it anyways for these just to make sure, just to show you guys. Now, I really want to show you on the side seam how it ends up looking. I need to get to the end of my ironing board there. No, it's fine where it is. It's convenient to have a pincushion that stands on its own. So. Now, one thing, when you do sew through pins like this, once in a while you'll catch the pin. And if you look at my pins, some of them are not exactly straight. That one's got a nice bend to it. Yeah. And of course, if you've got really thick fabric, you'll end up bending the pins all over the place. Pins are cheap. Okay. I'm sorry, you can buy 100 for like $2. It's not like they cost much. So I go through pins like crazy. I don't even really worry about it. So when I sew my side seam, I'm going to use the end of my board to make sure I can get to just the side seam. Okay. Now here's the tricky part. Again, we have a flat going into a curve. So I really want to make sure I open that seam up, okay? And again, I'm trying to make sure when I press, as I press, there's no wrinkled fabric underneath my iron, okay? I just want to press the seam part. But, once it's done, you can see it's got a nice... And it kind of follows the curve there, okay? And it creates this weird kind of bulging, seam. Guess what? It's a human body. It's not a straight line. And so, and you can see the other side, it's not really coming out the way it should. So that's why this seam needs to be pressed so that it shows the way it should. It actually molds into the curves and stuff like it should. Okay? All right, does everybody understand this part? Alright, so if you're to the part where you can sew, go ahead and start sewing. If you're still cutting out your fabric, cut your fabric out. Dirk, I'll get going with you. Alright. Ready? Alright, so I've pressed all my seams, and I'm ready to pin the rest of my stuff together. You can do this one piece at a time, or you can just pin it all and go for it. If you pin it all and go for it, you do stand the risk of stabbing yourself with pins several times. But hey, what's life without a little risk? First piece I'm going to pin in is my collar piece. We've got a very unusual shape here. We've got a big curve and a straight line. First thing I want to do, luckily, my back piece and my collar piece were both cut on a fold, so I can match the center of each one up. Okay? So I'm the center of my back piece and the center of my collar piece. That's where my first pin goes. Then I know that my collar piece should be long enough because I should have measured correctly. So I'll go to the corner. And again, I'm just pinning them in. And then you see it's all kind of gappy and weird. If I stretch it a little bit, it matches up perfectly. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to stretch the fabric. I'm going to hold it one at each pin. I usually grip with my pinkies, and then I can use my index finger and thumb to kind of, get the edge of the fabric to kind of match up there. Now I like to sew my seams open. Okay, so I'm at a point where there's a seam. I want to make sure when I sew that piece that it's open. But I'm putting my pins on the wrong side. I just noticed I'm putting my pins on the wrong side because I want my straight edge to be against my feet plate as I sew. And so I want to make, and since my collar is actually my straight edge, that's where I'm going to go with it. Now this may require a few more pins because there are lots more curves here. Okay? So we got to make sure as we go along that we put the pins in, and we try to. I'm stretching and pulling and easing the two edges together. Okay, so a couple extra pins. You gotta be careful. You may sew into those, but hey, that's fun. I like getting lightning bolt pins. I'm only going to pin half this collar for now. I'll pin the rest later while you guys are working on yours. So, but you guys can see, how I've managed to pin that in. Again, of course, I put all the pins on the wrong side, but it doesn't matter. Okay, so, but that's how we get it in. Now, I'm going to go to my skirting piece. Okay, the skirting piece. First of all, you got to figure out what's the front part and what's the back part. Yeah. If you didn't mark your center back and your center front, you're going to need to figure out. Usually, if you look at it, where it has the deeper curve, that's towards the back. Okay? So this edge would be my center back. Yeah, I know that just because, well, you know. So now I have two pieces, okay? And you can see which one has the deeper curve. No matter how I hold it, you can see that this edge is much straighter and that this curve is much deeper. That's the back, okay? Again, what I'm doing is, again, I'm just laying that whole right side versus right side thing, since my fabric doesn't really have a right side. Just got to make sure that, you know, my pieces are flat against each other. I'm going to line this edge, this back edge, up with my center back. Okay? Again, I put my pin in there. And again, what I'm going to do is go all the way out to the front corner, and it should pretty much line up. Now, that front corner may not be exactly that nice 90-degree angle, because why? We put that extra flare on the skirting piece. So just kind of make it match up as best you possibly can. Okay? Remember, there's a 1/2 inch seam allowance worked into there, so you can fudge a little bit. That's what seam allowance is for. And again, I'm just kind of stretch the fabric a little bit. Maybe try to find the middle of it. Make sure everything's even. And again, just try to ease these two together. Okay? They're not exactly the same length, but they're close enough that, you know, you should be fine. Again, I'm going to try to open my seam up so that as I sew it, it sews open. You know, that's just what that does, is that prevents, you know, this is what I mean by opening my seam up. Okay, you can see I've opened the flaps up. It's less bulky that way. Okay, if I put both sides of the seam flap on one side, it's going to create a bump right there in your fabric. We want to spread that out as much as possible. So again, yeah, you may have to have a couple extra threads here, a couple extra pins here to deal with the curve that you're going with, but shouldn't be too bad because you have two basically inside curves. And like I said, you can pin your full collar piece and both your skirting pieces in. Now, I would pin both skirting pieces in just so you can get a general look of the shape of the doublet. Now we only have one sleeve to put in, so yeah, that's kind of nice. We do have two epaulets to put in. Now really honestly, I put epaulets in with the curved side towards the sleeve and with the straight side towards the sleeve. And I have not seen it make a difference one way or another. So I find it's easiest to put the nice folded side into the sleeve. I like the look that this creates and everything else like that, so that's the side I typically put into the sleeve. Again, I got to find the center of it. Okay? Find the dead center of it by folding it in half lengthwise. That finds the center of it, and that is going right on top of my shoulder seam. I'm just going to match that fold up with that shoulder seam and then pin it in. Now this is a nice easy one to pin in. It just kind of works its way around the sleeve hole, the arm's eye, so it's not the full length of the arm's eye. So you just pin it until you run out of epaulette. And like I said, on one side, you're also going to pin a sleeve in here. Now you could conceivably pin the epaulette in and then pin the sleeve in. Pin the epaulette in, sew it, and then pin the sleeve in. I'm all for just sewing them all at the same time. So I pin one in so that it's in place, and now I got to put my sleeve in. Now when I put my sleeve in, I want to put it essentially right side to right side. Okay? The right side is the side that shows. Okay? You can see I've pinned my epaulette on the right side. And what's going to happen is after I sew this, it's going to flip over and it'll hide the seam, and it'll be there. Okay, well, my sleeve kind of needs to go into the same place. So if I kind of turn this inside out, well, now the right side's on the inside. I've got my sleeve turned so that it's right side out. As I said before, the cap of the sleeve does not go to the top of the shoulder. That's a modern, tailoring kind of thing. Again, modern, want to look good standing up straight and tall, not moving. Period clothes need to move. So what you actually need to do is this cap gets placed at the halfway point between the shoulder and the underarm. The easiest way to do that is to fold it, okay, match the center of your cap up with your seam. Now I made mine without, just two seams instead of doing it on a fold, so it's easiest just for me to match the two seams up, okay? Now, if I did this, this would be a left arm. If I do it this way, it's a right arm. That's all there is to it. What I have to do is I have to make sure that that cap lines up with the back piece of my doublet. Okay? So I'm going to place this fold right at the top of that shoulder seam. Okay? That way I know that that's right at the top and that that cap is going to end up about halfway between the shoulder and the base of the armpit. Okay, that's where I want it to end up. My epaulette's already pinned in there, so all I did was take the pin out of the epaulette and then put it through the sleeve and the epaulette. Now what I'm going to do is, again, I'm going to pull that sleeve tight, okay, and I'm going to find out the exact opposing point in the arm's eye from the shoulder seam. And that's where I'm going to put the bottom of this sleeve. There's a lot of extra material because of that cap. But what we want to do is we actually want to ease the two together. Okay? The inside's pretty easy. There's not a lot of extra fabric there. So that's the easy part. The outside, we got a nice cap there, and there's quite a bit of extra fabric. So what I do is I kind of actually insert a finger and kind of almost fold the pleat over my finger. And I find that point where there's the exact same amount of material on either side of that cap if I were to hold it. Okay, you can see there's still some gapping there, but it looks a lot less significant now. Ooh, thunder. And again, I'm just going to pin that in place. This is a set-in sleeve, okay? When we do the doublet construction, we're actually going to use a method of construction called bias tape construction. It will make putting these sleeves on the doublets a lot easier. Also makes repairing them a lot easier. So setting in a sleeve can be one of the biggest pains you will ever have to do in sewing. It is, like I said, and basically it's just, you're attaching the sleeve to the doublet as one big piece. That's what a set-in sleeve means. And it can be a real pain. And they can rip out every now and then. Like I said, all you're trying to do is ease it together, trying to, spread that extra fabric out around the sleeve. And again, it's gonna seem to wrinkle and bunch and everything else like that, and that's okay, because it's supposed to wrinkle and bunch and gather and everything else like that, because your body wrinkles and bunches and curves and everything else like that. So by the time you get done pinning this, it should not be sitting flat. It should be bunched up all over the place and have wrinkles where you're like, oh, it shouldn't have it, and everything else like that. So, all right, so that's pretty much it. And I've set my sleeve in. Now when I sew this, most machines have a removable piece of the machine so that you have a nice small piece to sew around in a circle, and that's really what it's for, is for when you sew sleeves and stuff like that. Alright? This is basically, once you get all these pieces sewn on, your mock-up will be done. Now this is the last class before I go on vacation. So while I'm on vacation, finish your mock-ups. You can put them on, they're not going to fit right. Okay, that's why we make mock-ups, so we can make adjustments to them. Okay, they're going to overlap where you don't think they should overlap and everything else like that. And when we get back from vacation, your mock-up should be done, and then we can go through fitting and changes to the pattern and how to make adjustments and everything else like that. All right? All right, so got about a half hour left here tonight. Get done what you can, but if you don't get it done, that's fine. We'll go through it when we get back from vacation. Okay?